Eat those buns in the sun. What's good, y'all? Soul here, and welcome back to my story mode. So we are finally in the month of February, which means that we are extremely close to finally seeing some form of news or updates in gameplay for Pokemon Legends ZA. Did you hear that? That was me actually kind of looking forward to it. That was a long and insanely quiet year from Pokemon, and part of me is extremely skeptical. But the other part of me, knock on wood, but a little hopeful, actually. I know Nintendo is not going to allow Pokemon Company / Game Freak to put out some game that looks like garbage on their brand new shiny console when they're trying to sell this thing. So I can only pray that this previous year, Game Freak locked the hell in and got something going for us. Now, I primarily bring up Pokemon Legends ZA because it kinda got me thinking a little bit this last week. Legends ZA is most likely what's going to be our primary mainline game for 2025, and we don't really know what's gonna come afterwards. Since next year is a major anniversary for Pokemon Company, it's only fair to assume that Generation 10 is around the corner. And naturally, of course, with the return of Mega Evolution, it really got me thinking about the prospect and the importance of gimmicks in these games. And so my thinking went along the lines of, what will we be getting next? What could possibly happen after getting Mega Evolutions back? Does that imply something, or is that just the case because this is a Legends game? But then, my thinking shifted completely, and I asked myself, what if we just didn't have a battle gimmick for Generation 10? Whoa there, pal. Slow your horses. You're getting out of control. What are you thinking suggesting something like no gimmicks? We've come too far with these gimmicks to take them out of our mainline games. See, but that's just it though. I have seen a lot of varying discourse when it's come to gimmicks. Plenty of people hate them, plenty of people love them, and plenty of people think that we should only have Mega Evolution and no other new gimmicks. Which brings me to my question. Does modern Pokemon need gimmicks? So with that, I believe the prompt is finally set. So why don't you go ahead, take a seat, cool down, grab yourself a nice Sprite. Maybe you're feeling hungry. May I suggest a meatloaf slathered in marinara and topped off with some sprinkles, while we decide whether or not modern Pokemon should continue with gimmicks. So the first thought that I kinda need to cover here is, would these previous couple of games survive without gimmicks? Little bit of a mixed bag question, isn't it? Well, why don't we go ahead and take a trip down memory lane real quick. During my first initial playthrough of Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, I did say something that I feel still kinda resonates with me today. I had noted that battling without gimmicks in that game was a little more on the refreshing side. For so long, there was always some form of gimmick that completely changed the way that you built your teams for so long that not having that and just playing through Diamond and Pearl for the first time in ages was really nice. Don't get me wrong though, I still am very angry with those games and still think that at least having a gimmick would have made the $60 that we spent on it hurt just a little bit less. Especially because the Gen 3 remakes had Mega Evolution, but regardless. Our primary problem with Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl wasn't the fact that there was no gimmicks, it was the fact that there were almost no changes in general to justify the existence of those games. And while I do think adding a gimmick would have been nice, I feel like that wouldn't have fixed the overall arcing problem with those two games. So in the case of Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, yeah, a gimmick would have been cool, but I don't think we needed it. I feel like we just needed more changes in general to those games. Having a gimmick would have just been a nice little cherry on top. Now we look to Pokemon Legends Arceus with the style change gimmick. This was a fun mechanic. Utilizing style changes to change up whether or not you can hit multiple times in one turn was a hell of a tactic change. Made me feel like I was playing SMT or something crazy like that. That was awesome. However, in my personal opinion, if we're being so completely honest, it was one of the more forgettable gimmicks. Like, I am very grateful that we were able to utilize style changes throughout the entirety of the game, but there was no real like story purpose for it or anything along those lines. You just kind of hit faster or you hit harder, and that was kind of the extent of it. Not to mention that there was no online battling in Pokemon Legends Arceus, so it's just kind of there. And you see, the thing about Pokemon Legends Arceus is that it wasn't the gimmick that made that game as fun and interesting as it was. It definitely helped, but that's not what did it. It was the fact that we felt like we finally had a Pokemon game that was the closest to our possible vision for this franchise. Having the power to ride around in these massive open zones amongst a bunch of Pokemon that were just roaming around atop of like a few Pokemon of choice was quite the change that we've been waiting for. There was also the fact that we had the ability to just throw our Pokemon out at any given time and have it do what we needed it to do, whether that be collecting an item or knocking an item out of a tree, breaking a rock, or obviously battling other Pokemon. But the best part about all of that is that these Pokemon actually really felt like wild Pokemon, and you were not restricted to having to battle them first. You could just throw a Pokeball and see if it works, like a real person would do if Pokemon were a real thing. Battles were quick and seamless. You were in and out in absolutely no time at all. The ability to dodge roll out of the way from the attacks of oncoming Pokemon because Pokemon could attack you. That is so awesome and real. Actual, genuine side quests with actual, genuine rewards. Oh, my heart. So I'm not speaking for everybody when I say this, but personally, I feel like Pokemon Legends Arceus offered so much in terms of content and mechanics and just general capability and scope that if we didn't have the gimmick of style changes, probably wouldn't have missed it all that much if we're being so real. Like, come on, you really think I'm gonna be worried about style changes when we have genuine boss battles in this game? Crazy thing. And it just goes to show how forgettable style changes are, considering the fact that we're getting another Legends game and we're just getting Mega Evolution back instead of style changes, which could have easily been a staple to the series, but that's not what they're doing. So it just kind of came and went. And to clarify, again, I have nothing against style changes. I think that they're neat. I feel like they're a good tactical advantage to utilize. I just feel like of the gimmicks that we've gotten throughout the years, they are definitely the most whatever of all the mechanics. What about generations 8 and 9? The pinnacle of shifts when it comes to gimmicks. Well, the introduction to Dynamaxing and Gigantamaxing was actually extremely neat. I do have my gripes with it as a mechanic. I don't think that it's perfect, but I do think that having it brought like a really fun spectacle to battles that we hadn't had even with Mega Evolution and Z moves and even Terrestrialization now. Having these massive ass sports arenas where you and a gym leader would go toe to toe with your strongest Pokemon Dynamaxing or Gigantamaxing is still easily one of the sickest things Pokemon has ever done. My thing though is that when you really sit down and think about it for a second, about like 50% of the game, you're not even utilizing Dynamaxing and Gigantamaxing that much. And when I say this, this of course applies to like the main game, not the post game, and obviously not raid battles. But like, it created a weird thing for me with Dynamaxing and Gigantamaxing, where it became kind of a positive and a negative that we couldn't use it throughout the entire game. A negative because, well, that kind of sucks. We have this awesome, cool new power-up, but a good majority of the time, we can't even utilize that against regular trainers. We have to be in very specific scenarios to use this gimmick. But on the other hand, it kind of created a situation in which if you're able to use Gigantamaxing and Dynamaxing, that means that your opponent is too, which means that this battle is really important and you should be careful in choosing who you decide to use your mechanic on. So in turn, by limiting how much you can use the mechanic, it kind of became a little more important, more of a spectacle, more of an event. So with something like Generation 8, it's kind of hard to say that we could live without it because with it, it really helped complement the game. Me personally, if I lived in the world of Pokemon and I heard that these top tier trainers were going toe to toe with giant Pokemon, I would definitely be in the stands firsthand, cheering along and singing the song, you feel me? So in the case of a mainline generational game like Generation 8, no, I don't think it could have worked well without a gimmick. And to save us a little bit of time here, I feel the same way about Generation 9. The very idea of terrestrialization is ingrained into the story, but on top of that, it's such a massive shift to tactic, being able to change any Pokemon's Terra typing, that I couldn't imagine not having that. I kind of feel bad when I think about it though, because in reality, terrestrialization was supposed to be a similar form of complement that Dynamaxing and Gigantamaxing was to Generation 8, in which having the freedom to change any Pokemon's Terra typing really embodies the freedom that you were supposed to have in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, what with it being an open world. Though I feel like not a lot of people see it that way because it got overshadowed by the fact that Pokemon Scarlet and Violet is so buggy and ugly that being in this open world Pokemon for the first time and having that freedom does not really matter. I still stand by what I said earlier though. I definitely think that it's very important that Generation 9 had terrestrialization. So you see where I'm getting at? This line of thinking kind of put me at something of a crossroads. Like, yeah, obviously some Pokemon titles could definitely survive without the gimmicks involved at all. However, there's other cases where having gimmicks implemented actually do help complement and improve the game in a couple of different ways. On the positive side of things, having gimmicks has refreshed Pokemon battles to a degree that we didn't even realize we needed back in, what, 2013? Jumping from absolutely nothing in Black 2 and White 2 to having Mega Evolution in X and Y initially felt like one of the most insane shifts in video games for me. Keep in mind, I was a very impressionable 13, 14-year-old at the time. But naturally, of course, I figured there's no way we could go back after this, and I was completely right. Every game after that always had something new and fresh to introduce to us, and it was always a good time. It really did feel like being handed something that I didn't even know that I wanted, and now that I have that thing, I want more of that thing going forward, and that is exactly what I got. Thankfully, I was for sure not on the internet at that age nearly as much as I am now. However, if there's one thing that I can say with certainty, it's that if they never introduced gimmicks, I feel like a lot of people definitely would start to agree that Pokemon battles would start getting really stale. Technically speaking, what a lot of people don't realize until way down the road is that Pokemon is baby's first JRPG. And we have gotten a lot of JRPGs throughout the years. Some of them turn-based, some of them action-based, whatever. Point is, just like any other major franchise JRPG series that you could think of, they had to evolve, and Pokemon had to eventually follow suit. It's thanks to the shifts that they made in their mindset when developing Persona and giving it gimmicks that it made it as popular as it did in the West. There's a reason Persona 5 is so insanely popular. So, just like pretty much any other game, if Pokemon was working with the exact same philosophies that it was in generations 1, 2, or 3, we would kind of be at a much harsher standstill than we have been. It's good to introduce gimmicks like this so that we can utilize different tactics in battle, make us strategize, make us think. We had to eventually grow out of just, okay, what move hits the hardest or what move is super effective against this Pokemon. There are just so many ways they could have gotten creative, and I'm so very glad that they did. And obviously, I'm not downplaying item usage and things like that, because that's also very important, but gimmicks also very much help in that department is what I'm trying to say. Especially when we get gimmicks that make more Pokemon more viable for usage. Something like terrestrialization made it so that plenty of other Pokemon could get a time in the limelight, because this is a mechanic that works for every Pokemon. Being able to change a Pokemon's typing is so incredibly useful, and it makes for so many unique and fun styles and strategies. No one person is using the exact same tactic unless they blatantly copied somebody else. But all of this to say, I am happy that gimmicks are here. They are a good crutch to have, especially in the heat of battle when you feel like you've got nothing else to utilize to get past your opponent and you hit that Mega Evolution or Z Move or Dynamax or Gigantamax or that Terrestrialization and really change things up. However though, of course, with the introduction of something like this, it's not without its downfalls. It's ironic that I say that it comes in handy as a crutch for battle, but when you really think about it from an outside perspective, it's kind of become something of a crutch for the dev team too. Now don't get it twisted, full props to the dev team of Game Freak for coming up with stuff like this, because we could never. Every time I've seen an opinion on what kind of gimmick somebody would like to see, it's fusions or something akin to something that we already have. It takes a lot of work to be that creative, man, something that I don't think Game Freak gets enough credit for, truly. However, so far, based on what we've gotten in the last decade or so when it comes to gimmicks, we've come to really rely on just power-ups and transformations. And I'm not necessarily saying that that's a problem, but there's a lot of different ways you can create gimmicks that isn't just a transformation or a quick boost. Terrestrialization kind of does fall under that, but if anything, it still kind of falls under quick boost in my opinion. With the introduction of something like Terrestrialization, I do hope that that means that eventually we'll come across a new gimmick that is purely tactic based as opposed to just getting strong really quick, you know? Especially since I think that that gimmick probably did the best job of making other Pokemon viable, because gimmicks beforehand kinda did the exact opposite, right? In Generation 8, nobody was just doing standard Dynamaxing when going into online battles or even in raid battles and stuff like that. You picked very specific Pokemon because those specific Pokemon had Gigantamax forms, and those were very clearly stronger. In the case of something like Pokemon Sun and Moon, certain Pokemon had very specific Z moves that were just better than others and a lot less generic. So you would stick with those Pokemon to utilize those Z moves as opposed to whatever else you had options for. And in that same vein, Mega Evolution was the start of it all, because only certain Pokemon get Mega Evolutions. So only certain Pokemon are viable for online battle or are just simply better for the meta. Case in point, we're kind of on a shift with that, and I really do hope that that's something that continues. Especially because when you really consider very specific situations like Mega Evolutions, 9 times out of 10, there's a very good chance we never even see these gimmicks again. One of the most frustrating aspects about gimmicks is the fact that there's a very good chance 9 times out of 10 that it's gonna be a one and done situation. Because Pokemon hasn't had gimmicks for so long, they feel like for some odd reason, they have to lock in with the lore all of a sudden and make reasons as to why we haven't seen things like Mega Evolution, Z-Move, Dynamaxing and Gigantamaxing, or Terrestrialization outside of their respective regions. But because of that very strange reasoning that literally nobody else would care about if they decided to change that, we rarely see these gimmicks come back, and that's especially frustrating because it would be so amazing to see these gimmicks pit up against each other. Could you imagine the tactics people would come up with if they were allowed to use any gimmick that we've ever had in one Pokemon game? It would be incredible. I mean, not that you have to imagine it, Pokemon Showdown is right there as definitive proof, but for whatever reason, they don't want to follow suit, and so we're left with very limited gimmicks, which means they have to continuously come up with new gimmicks every game. That's gotta be exhausting, especially when we have perfectly good gimmicks that would be so cool in some of these other games if they were made available, but this is the rock y'all buried yourselves under, so good luck digging around it. So, gimmicks are undeniably critical to modern Pokemon. It's very, very hard to imagine these modern games without a mechanic that changes up the tide of battle, because we've had it for so long now. But not to say that it's impossible to go without the traditional gimmicks that we've had for the last decade. All this to say, this is not me wanting to get rid of gimmicks at all. I feel like their addition has kind of brought more good than harm in the grand scheme of things, so I can't really see a future without it. But maybe we could do something different than just your regular schmegular power-up. Have y'all ever played a Pokemon fan game called Pokemon Reborn? If not, don't worry about it. But that game was notoriously hard as hell. And one of the reasons for that was because it introduced its own gimmick called field effects. Depending on the type of gym leader that you are facing in that game, they will most likely have a field effect that somehow, in some way, shape, or form, affects every Pokemon on the field. Maybe the field can power up electric type moves, so now you and your opponent is buffed. Maybe it'll enhance or debuff status moves, so maybe if you use something like Growl, your opponent's attack will go down twice as much. You see what I'm getting at here though? As much as it pisses me off, I am not gonna sit here and say that that was a bad idea by any means. They cooked with that. Which leads me to believe that Game Freak could easily come up with something of that caliber to change up tactics and battle for the mainline games without it having to be one of the standard 2. But you know what, at the end of the day, I guess it doesn't really matter, because even if we do get a new gimmick and it is one of the standard 2, we're probably gonna eat that sucker up. We don't need to lie to ourselves, come on now. So at the end of the day here, kind of hard to put all my thoughts into like one sentence, but I guess in a way I could say that I could see the franchise not utilizing gimmicks and it being fine, but not without getting stale after a while if they didn't have them. But hey, you know what? Maybe that's just me. So that just about wraps it up for this one here. Just a nice little passing thought, as a majority of my videos so happen to be lately. However, this one is definitely on the longer side. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. I had a lot of fun coming up with all of these thoughts and things like that. But I think I've said my piece here. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic over to you guys. And I want you guys to tell me everything that you guys are thinking in the comment section below. Do you think that Pokemon could survive without gimmicks? Do you think that modern Pokemon doesn't need gimmicks? Do you think we could get along just fine without them? Or do you think that gimmicks are a critical, unchanging part of Pokemon's like infrastructure, and there's no way in hell we can go without it for even one mainline game? Tell me everything that you guys are thinking in the comment section below, because you know for a fact that I am always going to be down there with you guys. But with that, it does appear to be skedaddle o'clock, so I'm gonna go ahead and do just that. I would like to thank you guys ever so much for watching. I truly do hope you enjoyed. Do me the greatest favor of dropping a like and a comment, and consider subscribing for more content just like this here. And with that, I'm gone. So thanks again, hope you enjoyed, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next video. Do me the greatest favor of taking good ass care, and I'll see you all next time.